Welcome to the Hotelligence Podcast, your strategic vantage point on the changing landscape of hotel safety. Hosted by Jim Kortz, a retired FBI DHS investigator, and Don Carr, a former frontline security owner-operator with years of first-hand incident response experience on hotel properties. Every episode brings you closer to understanding the full picture and what the future may hold. Let's begin.
Welcome to the very first episode of the Hotelligence Podcast. I'm Don. I spent years responding to incidents on hotel properties and in multifamily environments when I owned and operated boots-on-the-ground security guard companies. One of the biggest misconceptions I saw during that time was the belief that hotels were sitting on information that they could use to prevent problems, if only they chose to do so.
And I'm Jim. I spent my career in federal law enforcement working cases that required careful handling of sensitive information. And I think what most people don't realize is that collecting information and being allowed to use it are two very different things.
And this show is about unpacking those gaps, the space between what people assume hotels can do and what they're actually allowed to do.
And today, we're starting with a question we heard constantly from outside the industry.
Hotels already collect guest information, so why can't they use it to keep people safe? You already have the data assumption. Anytime something serious happened at a hotel, the reaction was almost automatic. People would say, didn't they have the guest ID? Or didn't they have a credit card on file? They weren't wrong. Hotels do collect that information.
Right, but collecting information for a transaction isn't the same as using it for analysis, judgment, or prevention. The moment information is used for anything beyond its original purpose, the risk profile changes completely.
Well said, Jim. And that's where the confusion starts. From the outside, it looks like unused potential. From the inside, it looks like legal exposure.
Yeah, so let's talk about what PII really means in practice. So when I say PII, I mean personally identifiable information, and that PII is tightly regulated, not just by law, but by contracts, brand policies, and internal risk controls. Once you attach meaning or interpretation to that data, you've crossed a line.
And hotels aren't built to cross that line. They collect information to complete a stay, not to evaluate intent, track behavior, or assess risk over time.
And the moment a hotel starts using guest data to identify patterns, it implies capability. And capability implies responsibility.
And responsibility changes everything.
Yep. So let's talk about why pattern analysis is a non-starter. So environments where pattern analysis is allowed, there are strict requirements: retention rules, documentation standards, oversight, clear thresholds for action.
From my time running on-site security operations, hotels simply didn't have that infrastructure. What they had were shift notes, staff turnover, and constant time pressure.
Yeah, and trying to perform analysis without those safeguards doesn't just create risk, it creates discoverable risk.
Right. And anything written down, stored, or retained becomes part of the record. And once it's part of the record, it can be questioned, challenged, or reframed later. So the discovery problem. One of the biggest drivers of hotel behavior I saw was discovery. If something exists in writing, it can surface in a lawsuit.
Notes that were never meant to imply judgment can be interpreted as such later. Partial observations can be reframed as ignored warnings.
So hotels are careful, not because they don't care, but because documentation creates obligation after the fact.
And obligation, once implied, is very difficult to undo.
What frontline staff actually experience? Well, from the property side, staff usually had fragments: a name, a room number, a brief interaction, a sense that something felt off. But they also knew they weren't supposed to judge. They were trained to deliver service, not interpretation.
And without clear authority or safe pathways to escalate uncertainty, hesitation becomes the default.
And that hesitation wasn't empathy. It was a self-protection inside a system with real consequences for getting it wrong.
Yeah. So here's the paradox. Here's the real paradox hotels live with. Using information creates responsibility. Not using it limits responsibility.
So from a legal standpoint, restraint was often safer than action, even when that restraint felt uncomfortable.
And this is why people inside hospitality often feel boxed in. They're operating inside systems that reward neutrality and penalize interpretation.
So now let's talk about why this is a system issue, not a people issue. It's important to say this clearly. Frontline staff weren't failing. Managers weren't ignoring things. Owners weren't indifferent.
Correct. They were operating within constraints that shaped what was possible and what was safe for them to do.
So when people say they should have known, they're usually reacting emotionally, not structurally.
And this podcast exists to explain the structure.
So in closing, the reason hotels can't freely use the information they collect isn't secrecy or indifference. It's risk. Legal, operational, and reputational risk.
Understanding that reality is the first step to understanding why so many well-intentioned ideas don't work inside hospitality.
In the next episode, we'll tackle another assumption people make all the time. Why hotels can't maintain blacklists, even though it sounds like common sense.
And that conversation sets up everything that follows.
And remember, we're in this together.
And together, we make hospitality stronger.
For a deeper breakdown and added context, sign up for the Hotelligence Insider Briefing. The link is in the show notes.
Thank you for joining the Hotelligence Podcast, where experience informs smarter, safer hotel operations and prepares you for what comes next. Stay informed, stay confident, and stay connected. As the conversation evolves, Jim Cords and Don Carr will highlight developments that help hotels strengthen their approach to safety and risk management. See you next episode.